Sarah sat at the small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee as the soft morning light filled the room. It was one of those quiet mornings that felt heavier than usual, not because of the silence, but because of what it reminded her of. The house that once echoed with laughter and conversations now felt like a place where time simply passed. The walls were the same, the furniture untouched, yet everything felt different since Mark left. He had been her husband for nearly 20 years, and though the end hadn't come with shouting or betrayal, it had come with something worse: indifference. One morning he just said, "I can't do this anymore," and walked away, leaving behind a marriage that had already been falling apart piece by piece. Sarah didn't chase after him. Maybe she was too tired, or maybe deep down she knew he was right. They had turned into two strangers sharing the same roof, pretending that love still lived there. After he left, Sarah learned that loneliness had many shapes: the quiet at dinner, the untouched pillow beside her, the way no one asked about her day anymore. But she wasn't entirely alone. Her son Ethan was still there, 17, kind-hearted, and full of a warmth that reminded her of what love should feel like. He had her eyes and Mark's smile, and even though he didn't say much, he noticed everything. She tried her best to keep things normal for him, cooking breakfast, asking about school, pretending everything was fine. But the truth was, some days she felt invisible even to herself. That morning, as Sarah stood by the counter spreading jam on toast, she caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection of the window. Her hair was messy, her eyes looked tired, and there were lines on her face she hadn't noticed before. She sighed softly. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped caring about how she looked. She used to love wearing bright colors, doing her makeup, putting on perfume, small things that made her feel alive. But now, those little joys had faded away. Just like everything else, Ethan walked in, rubbing his eyes still in his old hoodie. He yawned, grabbed a bowl from the cupboard, and poured himself some cereal. "Morning, Mom," he said, his voice groggy but warm. "Morning," Sarah replied with a faint smile. She turned back to the stove, pretending to be busy. Hiding the weariness in her eyes, a few seconds passed before Ethan spoke again. "You look really pretty today." Sarah froze for a moment, surprised. It had been so long since anyone had said those words to her. She turned around, unsure if he was teasing. But he was just sitting there eating his cereal casually, completely unaware of the storm his words had started inside her. She smiled softly, trying not to let her voice shake. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's very kind of you." Ethan looked up, smiled back, and said, "Well, it's true." Then he went back to eating like nothing had happened. Sarah felt something shift inside her. It wasn't just about being called pretty. It was about being seen. For the first time in a long while, she felt like someone had noticed her. Not as a mother, not as someone holding things together, but simply as herself. That one small compliment carried more warmth than all the months of quiet she had endured. After Ethan left for school, Sarah stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom. She studied her reflection, the soft lines on her face, the gentle tiredness in her eyes. She hadn't really looked at herself this way in a long time. She touched her cheek lightly and smiled a little. Maybe she didn't look like she used to, but there was still something in her, something kind, something strong. On impulse, she opened her drawer, pulled out her favorite lipstick, a soft shade of rose she hadn't worn since Mark left, and applied it. She laughed quietly at herself, shaking her head. It was silly, maybe even unnecessary, but it felt good. For a moment, she didn't feel invisible. Later that day, she went out to run errands, grocery shopping, a stop at the post office, the usual things. But something was different. When people smiled at her, she smiled back. When she passed by a shop window, she didn't look away. Even the autumn air felt lighter. That one simple moment at breakfast had changed her day. She didn't realize it yet. But those small words from her son would become something she carried for years. They would be the spark that reminded her she was still capable of being happy, of being noticed, of being loved even after heartbreak. That evening, Sarah cooked dinner like she always did, but she added a little more effort this time. She made Ethan's favorite pasta and even set the table nicely. When he came home, he noticed right away. "Whoa, what's the occasion?" he asked with a grin. "Just felt like it," she said, smiling. They ate together, talking about his school day, his friends, the college letters starting to come in. He was growing up so fast, and she realized how much of her world revolved around him. She had spent so long giving, worrying, holding everything together, she had forgotten to live for herself. But now, with just one kind word, something had awakened in her heart, a quiet reminder that she was still here, still capable of feeling joy. After dinner, she stood at the porch while the evening breeze brushed her hair. The world outside was calm, the sky turning shades of orange and pink. She thought of Mark, of the years they had spent together, of how love could fade even without cruelty. Then she thought of Ethan, of his simple, honest kindness, and realized love didn't always have to be grand or perfect. Sometimes it was just in the words that came from someone who truly cared that night. Before going to bed, Sarah opened her old journal, the one she hadn't touched since her marriage ended. She wrote a single sentence. He said, "I looked pretty today." It might have seemed small to anyone else, but to her, it meant everything. It was a moment that reminded her she wasn't invisible. It reminded her that even in the quietest mornings, something beautiful could still begin. And though she didn't know it then, this tiny spark, born from her son's innocent words, would be the beginning of something new. A slow, gentle rediscovery of life, of hope, and eventually of love. But for now, as she lay in bed that night, Sarah simply smiled to herself and whispered softly, "Thank you, Ethan," 'cause sometimes all it takes to wake a heart that's forgotten how to feel is a single, unexpected act of kindness. And that morning, those few simple words from her son stayed with her, not just for the day, but for the rest of her life. The following Saturday morning, Sarah woke to the sound of rain tapping against her window. The world outside looked calm and gray, and for once, she didn't mind. There was something peaceful about the sound, like the earth was starting fresh. She had been trying to do the same. Ever since Ethan's kind words, something inside her had changed. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but she felt a small, steady warmth, returning, the kind that made her notice life again. She got dressed, pulling on her long beige coat and a light scarf. It had been a while since she had gone anywhere just for herself. So she decided to visit her favorite little bookstore downtown. A cozy place with wooden shelves, warm lighting, and the smell of old paper and fresh coffee. She used to go there all the time, years ago, back when she still dreamed about writing, back when her heart was full of hope instead of quiet. The bell above the door chimed as she walked in. The familiar scent greeted her instantly, and she smiled. The place looked the same, though a few new books lined the display tables. She wandered through the aisles slowly, running her fingers along the spines of novels she had once loved. For the first time in months, her thoughts weren't heavy. She felt at ease, like maybe she belonged here again, as she reached for a book near the end of a shelf. A voice spoke from behind her, calm, low, and friendly. "Excuse me," it said, "you're holding my favorite book." Startled, Sarah turned around. Standing there was a man about her age, tall, with short brown hair touched with gray and a kind expression. He wore a navy sweater and a leather jacket that had clearly seen years of use. His smile was easy, not the kind that demanded attention, the kind that made you feel safe. Sarah looked down at the book in her hands, Letters to Tomorrow. "Oh," she said, smiling a little. "I didn't realize it had fans." "Only the sentimental kind," he replied with a light laugh. "It's full of those quiet thoughts you never say out loud." She nodded, glancing at the cover. "That sounds like something I'd like." The man extended his hand. "I'm Daniel, Sarah," she said, shaking his hand. His grip was warm, his presence calm. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Nice to meet you, Sarah. I promise I won't fight you for the book." She laughed softly, a real laugh, the kind she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. They talked for a while right there between the shelves. He told her he was a high school English teacher, recently divorced, and trying to fill his quiet weekends with something other than television and leftover takeout. She shared that she used to work part-time at the library, but had taken a break to focus on her son. who was finishing high school, their conversation flowed naturally, like two people who had known each other longer than a few minutes. There was no awkwardness, no forced politeness, just an easy rhythm. When he spoke, Daniel looked at her like he was actually listening, not just waiting for his turn to talk. Sarah noticed how rare that was, and it made her want to keep talking. They moved toward the small cafe corner inside the bookstore, where they ordered coffee and sat near the window. Rain continued to fall outside, the sound soft and steady. Daniel asked her about the book she was reading at home, and she admitted she hadn't finished one in months. "I used to love reading," she said quietly, "but life got in the way." He smiled gently. "Then maybe it's time to start again. Some stories are worth coming back to, just like people." Something about that sentence stayed with her. She didn't say much after, just smiled faintly and looked out the window. She didn't know this man, not really, but in his company, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. An hour passed before she realized how long they'd been talking. Time seemed to move differently around him. Softer, slower. She finally stood, saying she should head home before the rain got worse. Daniel stood too and smiled. "It was nice meeting you, Sarah. I'm glad we reached for the same book." "Me too," she said honestly. Before she could leave, he added, "If you ever want someone to recommend you another one, I'm around here most weekends." Sarah hesitated for a moment. Then she smiled and said, "Maybe I'll take you up on that." She stepped outside into the drizzle. Her heart felt lighter than it had in a long time. The world looked the same: gray skies, wet streets, people hurrying by, yet everything seemed softer. She walked slowly, the book in her hand, her scarf brushing against her cheek. She didn't fully understand why she felt so calm, but she did. When she reached home, Ethan was on the couch watching something on his phone. "Hey, Mom," he said casually. "You look happy. What's up?" Sarah smiled, setting the book on the counter. "I met someone interesting today." Ethan raised a brow but didn't pry. "A friend." "Maybe," she said with a shrug, though she wasn't sure what to call it. She went to her room and sat on the edge of her bed, still thinking about the conversation. About the way Daniel had spoken to her, not out of pity or politeness, but with genuine warmth. It had been so long since she had connected with someone that easily. She didn't want to read too much into it. Yet part of her couldn't help but wonder if this was life's way of reminding her that it wasn't over. That night she opened the book Daniel had recommended. As she read, one sentence caught her attention. "Sometimes we don't find people to fill the emptiness. We find them to remind us we were never empty to begin with." The words made her pause. She thought of Ethan, of the kindness that had sparked her change. And now of Daniel, a stranger whose smile had made her believe that maybe, just maybe, she could start again. In bed, she turned off the light but didn't sleep right away. The rain still whispered outside. And her mind replayed the small moments of the day, the laughter, the way he looked at her when she spoke, the feeling of being truly seen. She didn't know if she would see him again, but even the thought made her heart beat a little faster. Sarah had spent years believing her story was over. That love and warmth belonged to a past she couldn't return to. But that day at the bookstore showed her something simple yet powerful, that sometimes new chapters begin quietly, without warning. As she drifted off to sleep, she whispered to herself, "Maybe kindness finds its way back." And somewhere deep in her heart, she believed it in the weeks that followed. Sarah and Daniel began to see each other more often. It started with chance meetings at the bookstore, then with texts about books, and soon turned into shared coffee breaks and quiet walks by the lake. There was no rush between them, no promises, just two people slowly learning how to feel comfortable again. Sarah liked that about him. He didn't try to impress her, didn't talk too much, didn't make her feel small. With Daniel, silence wasn't awkward, it was peaceful. Every time they met, Sarah found herself opening up a little more. She told him about her marriage, about how it had faded rather than fallen apart. She admitted she still struggled with guilt, wondering if she had stopped trying too soon. Daniel listened with quiet patience, never interrupting. When she finished, he said gently, "You don't owe anyone an explanation for what broke you. Sometimes things just And those words stayed with her. She wasn't used to someone understanding without judgment. In Daniel's company, she felt like she could breathe again. He made her laugh about small things like how he always lost his car keys, or how he once tried to cook dinner for his daughter and nearly set off the smoke alarm. He was kind, gentle, and a little clumsy in a way that felt real. Still, Sarah was careful. Her heart had learned how to protect itself. Every time she began to feel close to him, a quiet fear crept in, reminding her of how love had once slipped away without warning. She didn't want to repeat old mistakes. She didn't want to depend on anyone again, only to be left standing in the silence. One evening, they met at the lake after work. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. They sat on a wooden bench, sipping coffee, watching the ripples in the water. Daniel looked at her and smiled. "You look peaceful tonight," he said. Sarah chuckled softly. "That's rare for me." He tilted his head. "Maybe peace just needed time to find you again." She didn't respond right away. The way he said it made something stir inside her. She realized she hadn't felt this kind of calm in years. It wasn't passion or excitement. It was something gentler, deeper, a feeling that told her she was safe. Daniel looked out at the lake. "You know, when my marriage ended, I thought that was it. I didn't think I could ever feel connected to someone again. But lately, I'm starting to believe maybe second chances don't come in big ways. Maybe they start small, like meeting someone in a bookstore." Sarah turned to him, caught off guard by his honesty. She smiled softly. "Maybe you're right." They sat quietly for a while, watching the last bit of sunlight fade. When it grew dark, Daniel walked her to her car. Before she got in, he said, "Sarah, you don't have to say anything. But I just want you to know I really enjoy spending time with you." Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting that, though part of her had known it all along. She smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. "I enjoy it too." When she got home, Ethan was sitting on the porch, headphones in, scrolling through his phone. "Hey, Mom," he said, looking up. "You were out late." Sarah smiled, setting her bag down. "Just went for a walk." He studied her for a second. "You've been smiling a lot lately." She laughed softly. "That's a bad thing." "No," he said quickly, smiling. "It's nice to see. I like it." She felt a lump in her throat. He was growing up so fast, more observant than she realized. For years, he had seen her carry sadness quietly, and now he was noticing her healing. That night, as she tucked herself into bed, she couldn't help thinking how much her son's kindness had started all of this. His small, thoughtful words had been the spark that allowed her to open her heart again. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself thinking about Daniel more often. She would remember the way he listened, the warmth in his eyes, the calm in his voice. But every time she started to imagine what might come next, she pulled herself back. She had built her world around safety, around control, around not being hurt again. Letting herself feel too much, even something good, scared her. Then one afternoon, she got a text from Daniel. "Bookstore coffee later. Rain's coming. Thought it'd be the perfect excuse to hide inside." She smiled at her phone for a full minute before replying. "You read my mind?" That evening, as they sat in their usual corner of the cafe, Sarah noticed how natural it felt to be there with him. It wasn't forced or awkward, it was easy. He told her about his daughter Emma, who was in college studying art, and how proud he was of her. Sarah listened, admiring the way his eyes softened when he talked about family. "You're a good father," she said quietly. He smiled. "I try. Though she tells me I overthink things too much." Sarah laughed. Maybe that's what good parents do. For a moment, their eyes met and held. It wasn't a loud or dramatic connection, just something quiet and certain. A feeling that said, "I see you. I understand you." Sarah felt her heart stir again, and this time, she didn't fight it. When they left the cafe, rain had started to fall. Daniel offered his jacket, and she hesitated, but took it. As they walked under the soft rain, sharing an umbrella, Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. Not the rush of young love, but something deeper, steadier. When they reached her car, she handed his jacket back. "Thank you," she said, smiling. He shook his head. Keep it. Just bring it next time, next time. She repeated playfully. He grinned. You didn't think I was done talking about books, did you? She laughed, shaking her head. No, I didn't. That night, Sarah lay awake, thinking about how life could surprise you in the quietest ways. How something as simple as meeting someone new could begin to heal wounds you thought would never close. Daniel hadn't tried to fix her. He hadn't promised anything. He had simply shown up, and somehow that was enough. The next morning, as she made breakfast, Ethan walked in and leaned on the counter. Mom, he said carefully, you've been different lately, in a good way. Sarah looked up, curious. Different how? He smiled softly. You just seem happier, lighter. I like seeing that. She felt her eyes well up but tried to hide it by busying herself with the toaster. That means a lot, sweetheart. Ethan hesitated, then said something that made her heart ache, in the best way possible. You've done everything for me all these years. You deserve to have someone who makes you happy too. Sarah turned to look at him, her eyes filled with emotion. He was still her little boy, yet in that moment he spoke with the tenderness of someone far older. She walked over and hugged him tightly. Thank you, Ethan. You have no idea how much that means. That night, as the house grew quiet, Sarah realized that life had given her a gift she never expected. Not just a man who made her feel alive again, but a reminder of the strength and kindness that had always lived inside her and her son for the first time in years. Sarah didn't fall asleep replaying the past. She closed her eyes thinking about tomorrow and the small, beautiful chances it might bring. Winter came quietly that year. The trees outside Sarah's house stood bare, their branches glistening with frost in the early light. But inside, the air was warm, filled with the smell of cinnamon candles and something else, laughter. It had been months since she met Daniel, and somehow his presence had blended into her life as naturally as morning coffee. He came by often, sometimes with a book in hand, sometimes just to help with little things around the house. Ethan had grown used to seeing him around and seemed to like him, which comforted Sarah more than she could say. On a Saturday evening, Sarah was setting the table for dinner. Daniel had promised to stop by and bring dessert. Ethan was helping her, placing plates carefully and joking about how Daniel always forgot something. Watch, he's going to forget the dessert this time, Ethan teased. Sarah laughed, shaking her head. He's been trying hard lately. Give him some credit. Just then, there was a knock at the door. When Sarah opened it, Daniel stood there with snow on his shoulders, holding a pie and wearing a grin. See? I didn't forget this time, he said proudly. Ethan laughed from the kitchen. Guess I owe you an apology, Daniel. They all sat down to eat, the atmosphere light and full of warmth. Daniel and Ethan got along well, talking about music, movies, and life after high school. Sarah sat back, watching them with quiet joy. For so long, dinner had been silent, filled with the sound of forks and knives, but not laughter. Now the house felt alive again. After dinner, they moved to the living room, sitting by the fireplace. Daniel handed Sarah a small gift, a book wrapped in brown paper. Open it, he said with a shy smile. She unwrapped it carefully. It was a new edition of Letters to Tomorrow, the same book that had brought them together. Inside the cover was a handwritten note for the woman who reminded me that quiet hearts can still dream. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she read it. This is beautiful, she said softly. Daniel smiled gently. You deserve beautiful things. Ethan, pretending to look away, hid his smile. He was happy to see his mother like this, glowing not with excitement, but with peace. It was the kind of happiness that came when someone found comfort after years of loneliness. Later that night, after Daniel left, Ethan helped his mom clean up. The house was quiet again, but it felt different now, alive with warmth instead of emptiness. As they put away the dishes, Ethan said suddenly, You look happy, Mom. Sarah smiled, her heart swelling. I am, she said truthfully. I like him, Ethan continued. Daniel's good for you. Sarah looked at her son, realizing just how grown up he sounded. You think so? He nodded. Yeah, you've been through a lot. You deserve someone who treats you right. She walked over and hugged him, her eyes glistening. "You're the reason I found the courage to let someone in again. You know that?" He pulled back, confused. "Me?" She smiled softly. "It started the morning you told me I looked pretty. You said it so easily, but those words, they made me see myself differently. You reminded me that I still mattered." Ethan looked touched, unsure what to say. "I just said what I saw, Mom." "That's what made it so special," she whispered. That night, when she went to bed, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about how much had changed in a few short months. She had gone from living in quiet emptiness to rediscovering warmth, laughter, and love. Not the kind of love that rushed or demanded, but one that healed slowly and kindly, the kind that made her believe again. The next day, Sarah invited Daniel and Ethan to go ice skating at the park. It had been years since she'd done anything like that. The air was crisp, the ground dusted with snow, and the sound of laughter filled the rink. Daniel held her hand as she tried to keep her balance, teasing her every time she wobbled. "You're doing great," he said with a smile. "Oh, sure," she laughed. "I've only fallen twice." Ethan skated past them, laughing. "You two are slow." Sarah couldn't remember the last time she had laughed that hard. For a few hours, everything felt simple. No worries, no doubts, just joy. Later, when they sat down with hot chocolate, Sarah leaned back and watched Daniel and Ethan joking together. Her heart felt full. It was strange how life could rebuild itself when you least expected it, quietly, like snow falling on an empty street. As months passed, their bond grew stronger. Daniel never pushed, never tried to rush her into anything she wasn't ready for. He simply stayed, showing up, listening, being there. Sarah realized that love didn't always have to be about grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it was just about consistency, kindness, and being seen for who you really were. One evening, as the three of them sat by the fireplace again, Ethan suddenly said, "See, Mom? I told you you'd be happy again." Sarah smiled, her eyes soft. "Yes, you did," she said, her voice thick with emotion. He grinned. "Guess I'm pretty smart," she laughed. "You are." Then, with a quiet seriousness, she added, "You were right in more ways than you know, Ethan. You helped me find hope again. Your words, that small compliment, started everything. It stayed with me, and it reminded me that even small kindness can change a life." Ethan looked touched, but embarrassed. "I didn't do much, Mom." She shook her head gently. "You did more than you think." Daniel, sitting beside her, reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm, steady, the kind that spoke without words. Sarah squeezed his hand back, feeling the peace she had been missing for years settle inside her. That night, when Ethan went to bed, Daniel and Sarah sat quietly by the fire. The room glowed softly, the world outside cold and still. Daniel turned to her and said, "You've built something beautiful here, Sarah. Not just with me, but with your son, with your life. You should be proud." She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "I'm just grateful. I thought my story was over, but it turns out it was only beginning again." He leaned closer, his voice low and sincere. Sometimes all we need is one person to remind us that we're still capable of being loved. Sarah looked into his eyes and whispered, "For me, that reminder came from my son." Daniel smiled softly. "Then he's a wise young man." Sarah laughed through her tears. "He really is." The fire crackled quietly, filling the silence with warmth. For the first time in years, Sarah's heart was calm. She wasn't chasing happiness anymore, she was living it. As she closed her eyes that night, she thought back to that ordinary morning months ago, when Ethan had looked at her across the breakfast table and said, "You look really pretty today." She hadn't known then that those simple words would change everything, that they would heal her heart, guide her to new love, and remind her that kindness, even the smallest kind, could last a lifetime. And so whenever life felt uncertain, whenever doubt crept back in, Sarah would remember her son's voice, gentle, pure, full of love and smile. Because sometimes the most powerful words are the ones spoken without realizing how deeply they'll stay. They were words that began her second chance, and words she carried forever. After dinner, Ethan went to his room, and Clara sat in the living room reading one of Michael's old books. She tried to focus, but her mind drifted to the way Ethan had looked at her that morning, kind but distant. Like someone who wanted to say more but didn't know how. The clock ticked softly. The house, though brighter now, still carried the same emptiness. She sighed and closed the book. Maybe she just needed company. She walked down the hallway and gently knocked on Ethan's door. "Are you awake?" "Yeah, come in," he said. He was sitting on his bed sketching something in his notebook. The lamp beside him cast a warm glow on the page. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Not really," she admitted, smiling faintly. "It's too quiet." He set the notebook aside. "You can stay here again if you want. I promise I don't snore." Clara laughed softly. The first real laugh in a long time. "You sure?" "You used to when you were 16, Ethan grinned. "I outgrew it, mostly." She sat at the edge of the bed, and he leaned back against the wall. For a moment, they just listened to the sound of light rain outside. "You've changed a lot," she said after a while. "You're more patient now, calmer. College does that," he replied. Then he paused. "And losing someone does, too." Clara looked at him carefully. His words were simple, but they carried weight. He had grown into a man during his father's absence. She could see the reflection of Michael, in him the same kindness, the same steady presence. "I used to think I'd never be okay again," she admitted quietly. "After your father. I didn't know how to keep living without him." Ethan nodded. "I know what you mean. For a while, I couldn't even walk past his study. Everything in there still smells like him." They both looked toward the hallway where that study waited untouched since the funeral. Neither had found the courage to open it. After a long pause, Ethan said softly, "He loved you, you know? More than I've ever seen anyone love another person." Clara's breath caught. "He told you that?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, he said you made him believe in second chances." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "He said the same about you," she whispered. "He worried about leaving you, even when he was sick. He wanted to make sure you were strong enough to handle the world." Ethan's voice broke a little. "I wasn't, not at first, but I'm trying." "You're doing more than trying," Clara said, her tone gentle but firm. "You're becoming the man he always hoped you'd be." For a moment, their eyes met, and something shifted quietly between them. It wasn't romantic, it was human, deep, and full of shared understanding. It was the kind of connection that comes from shared pain, from helping each other hold what's too heavy to carry alone. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, but neither of them moved. Ethan finally spoke again, voice low. "You should lie down, Clara. You'll get a stiff neck sitting like that." She hesitated, then nodded, lying back on top of the blanket. The bed was soft, and the sound of the rain was calming. Ethan stayed sitting, flipping through his sketchbook. "What are you drawing?" she asked softly. He showed her a half-finished sketch of the lake from that old photo. "It helps me think," he said. "Sometimes I draw just to remember him." Clara smiled faintly. "It's beautiful." "Thanks," he said. "I guess drawing's my way of keeping him close." She nodded. "We all need something for that." Minutes passed. The storm grew quieter, and her eyes started to close. Ethan looked at her, then blew out the candle to let her rest. In the faint light from the window, her face looked calm, no longer burdened by the sadness she usually carried. He whispered, almost to himself, "Dad would have been glad you're not alone tonight." Clara, half asleep, heard his words. "Neither are you," she murmured back. Ethan smiled, though she didn't see it. He sat there for a while longer, listening to the rain until he drifted off too. The night passed peacefully. When morning came, sunlight filled the room, warm and gold. The world outside felt alive again, clean and bright. For the first time in months, Clara woke up not to loneliness, but to a quiet sense of belonging. The grief was still there, but it no longer ruled her heart. Something gentler had taken its place. She glanced at Ethan, still asleep by the window. She didn't know what the days ahead would bring, but for the first time since Michael's death, she felt ready to face them. The storm was over, and something new had begun. The days after the storm passed quietly. The air outside grew warmer, and sunlight began to pour through the windows of the Benson house again. For Clara, life started to move at a steadier rhythm. The silence in the house was no longer as heavy as before. Ethan's presence made it softer, less lonely. He had a way of bringing calm without saying much, the same quiet strength that his father once had. Clara spent her mornings tending to the garden, something she had avoided since Michael's death. The roses were blooming again, and for the first time in months, she felt joy in simple things. Ethan often joined her, helping to trim branches or fix the old fence. They didn't talk much while working, but their quiet teamwork carried an easy comfort. One afternoon, as they worked side by side, Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead and said, "You kept this garden alive all by yourself." Clara smiled faintly. "Not very well. I almost gave up a few times." He nodded. "Dad used to say you were the only one who could keep these flowers alive." I think he was right. The words warmed her heart. Hearing him speak of Michael so naturally felt healing, not painful. She glanced at Ethan and saw how much he had matured. The shy boy she had met years ago was gone. In his place was a man who carried loss with quiet dignity. Later that day, Ethan went into town to buy groceries. When he returned, he brought Clara her favorite tea without her asking. "They had that cinnamon blend you like," he said casually, setting it on the counter. Clara paused, touched. "You remembered?" He shrugged, smiling a little. "You used to make it every Sunday morning." It was a small gesture, but it meant more to her than he knew. For the first time since Michael's passing, someone had noticed the small things that made her feel like herself again. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, they shared dinner together. The soft orange glow of twilight filled the kitchen. Clara prepared roasted vegetables while Ethan talked about college's classes, friends, and the pressures of figuring out what came next. "I'm thinking of changing my major," he said between bites. "Dad wanted me to study business, but I don't think that's me." Clara tilted her head. "Then what do you want?" He looked thoughtful. "Something creative, maybe architecture. I like building things. Designing spaces that make people feel at peace." "That sounds like something you'd be good at," she said sincerely. "You've always had an eye for detail." Ethan smiled. "Thanks. It's nice to have someone believe in me." Clara felt her chest tighten with emotion. She reached across the table, resting her hand briefly over his. "Your father would be proud. You don't need to follow his exact path to honor him. You just need to live your life fully." He didn't move his hand away. "I'll try," he said softly. "You make it sound possible." They held each other's gaze for a quiet moment before Clara gently pulled her hand back, not wanting to make things awkward. But in that small exchange, something unspoken passed between them: trust, warmth, and a shared understanding that both needed someone to hold on to. Even if just in spirit. Days passed and their bond deepened naturally. They found small ways to help each other heal. Ethan would fix things around the house door hinges, old bulbs, creaky steps, while Clara cooked his favorite meals or helped him organize his projects. Their home began to feel alive again one evening. After cleaning the kitchen together, Ethan said, "You know, I used to avoid this house. It felt too big without Dad, but now it feels like home again." Clara turned to him with a faint smile. "That makes me happy. I was scared it never would." He hesitated, then said quietly, "You made it home again." Those words lingered in her mind long after he went to bed. She sat on the porch, sipping tea, thinking about how strange life could be, how loss could break two people apart, yet slowly bring them closer in unexpected ways. A few days later, they decided to finally open Michael's old study. It had remained untouched since his death. Dust had gathered on the desk, and the air smelled faintly of paper and cedar. Ethan walked in first, his steps careful. Clara followed, her heart racing. She ran her fingers over the old books and notes scattered on the table. There were photos tucked into drawers, Michael fishing, smiling. Living. Ethan found an old letter tucked between two books. He unfolded it slowly, then handed it to her. "It's for you," he said softly. Clara's eyes filled with tears as she read Michael's familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. Take care of Ethan. He's stronger than he knows. And take care of yourself too, Clara. Don't close your heart. Love doesn't end, just changes form." Her hand trembled as she held the letter. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew how hard this would be." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "He wanted you to keep living, Clara. We both should." She turned to him, tears in her eyes. "You sound just like him." He smiled sadly. "Maybe that's a good thing." For a moment they stood there, two people bound not just by grief, but by the love of the same man who had shaped both their lives. The air in the room felt lighter, almost peaceful. The night had fallen quietly over the small Oregon town. A soft drizzle danced across the rooftops, painting silver lines down the windows. Inside the Benson house, silence stretched through every room. The kind of silence that follows after someone important is gone. Ever since Michael Benson had passed away, the house no longer felt like home to Clara. It was only a building now cold, still, and filled with memories she wasn't ready to face. Clara had always been strong. She was the kind of woman who kept things in order, even when her heart was breaking. She smiled for the neighbors. She answered calls from relatives. She even kept up the garden Michael had loved. But when the sun went down and the lights dimmed, her strength faded. The loneliness crept in, quiet but heavy, settling deep in her chest like winter air. That evening, the sky turned dark faster than usual. The wind howled through the trees, and a low growl of thunder rolled over the hills. Clara stood by the kitchen window, watching the storm build. She thought of how Michael used to tease her about being scared of thunder. "It's just the sky stretching," he would say, laughing. Now without him, the sound made her heart jump. "Upstairs, Ethan." Michael's son from his first marriage was unpacking his bags. He had returned from college for a short visit, a quiet young man with kind eyes and a thoughtful nature. Clara had known him since he was 15. He had always been polite, but after his father's death, something inside him had changed. He spoke less, smiled rarely, and often stayed in his room, lost in his thoughts. Clara didn't blame him. They were both grieving in their own ways. They had lost the same person, but from different parts of their hearts. For Clara, Michael had been her husband, her partner, her steady hand. For Ethan, he had been his father, his guide, his safety. Losing him had left them both searching for something that no longer existed. When the storm grew stronger, the power flickered once, twice, and then the house went dark. The only sound was the rain hammering against the roof. Clara's heart raced. She had never liked being alone in the dark. She reached for her phone, but the signal was gone too. Somewhere down the hallway, she heard a door open. "Clara." Ethan's voice called out. It was calm, but slightly unsure. "I'm okay," she answered, her voice shaking more than she intended. "Just startled." "Stay there. I'll get a candle." A few moments later, the faint glow of a small flame appeared in the hallway. Ethan walked in with a candle in his hand, his shadow stretching across the wall. He looked tired but concerned. "The power's out across the street too," he said. "It's a big storm." Clara nodded. "I'll just wait it out in the living room." But another crash of thunder made her flinch. The windows rattled, and for a moment she thought the wind might break through. Ethan noticed and gave a small smile. "You can stay in my room if you want. It's warmer there." "The windows are smaller." Clara hesitated. She didn't want to seem fragile, but her hands were already trembling. "Maybe just for a while," she said softly. Ethan led her to his room. It was simple and neat, a few books stacked on the nightstand, a framed picture of him and his father on the dresser, and a half-finished sketch on his desk. The candlelight made everything feel softer, almost peaceful. "Here," Ethan said, pulling a blanket from the chair. "You can sit on the bed." "I'll take the chair." Clara smiled faintly. "You don't have to. It's your room." "It's fine," he said. "You look cold." She sat down at the foot of his bed, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. The air smelled faintly of old paper and rain. For the first time that night, she felt a little safer. Ethan sat across from her, his face calm in the candlelight. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was quiet in a way that felt familiar, as if both understood that words weren't needed. They were two people bound by loss, finding comfort in simply existing near each other. After a while, Clara said quietly, "You remind me of him?" Ethan looked up. "My dad." "Yes," she said. "When you sit like that, you have this same look in your eyes." He used to sit just like that when he was thinking. Ethan gave a small, sad smile. "I didn't think I remembered things like that anymore." "He'd be proud of you," Clara said softly. Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked down at the candle flame instead. "I still hear him sometimes," he whispered. "Not like a ghost or anything. Just memories. When I'm working or when it rains like this." Clara nodded. "Me too." The storm outside roared, shaking the windows again. Without thinking, Clara pulled the blanket tighter. Ethan noticed and quietly stood up. He grabbed another blanket from the closet and handed it to her. "Here," he said, his voice gentle. She accepted it, smiling faintly. "Thank you." For a while, they just listened to the rain. There was something strangely comforting about it, the way it filled the silence that grief had left behind. Clara found herself looking at Ethan again. He had grown so much. Not just older, but steadier. There was kindness in his eyes, a quiet strength that reminded her of Michael. The thought made her chest tighten. She looked away quickly, focusing on the flickering flame. She didn't want him to see her cry. Ethan broke the silence again, his tone lighter this time. "You always make tea when it rains. You used to do that with Dad." Clara laughed softly. "Old habits." "Cake and make some," he offered. But she shook her head. "No need. I think I'll just sit here for a while." He nodded and sat back in his chair. The thunder faded to a soft rumble. The storm was moving on, but neither of them seemed in a hurry to leave. The air felt heavy with things, unsaid shared memories, buried pain, quiet gratitude. Clara looked around the room once more. There were traces of Michael everywhere, his handwriting on an old note, a fishing photo, a watch on the shelf. Yet for the first time in months, those reminders didn't make her break down. They made her feel connected. Ethan leaned his head back, eyes half closed. "You know," he said softly, "it's not as lonely when you're here." Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to say something, anything, but all that came out was a whisper. "I know." Outside, the rain began to slow. The candle flickered lower, and Clara's eyes grew heavy. She didn't mean to fall asleep, but exhaustion finally caught up with her. The last thing she heard was the soft rhythm of the rain and Ethan's quiet breathing across the room. For the first time in a long while, she didn't dream about loss. She simply dreamed of quiet, a peace she thought she had, forgotten. And somewhere between the sound of rain and the stillness of morning, the first threads of healing began to form. This version stays completely within YouTube's monetization policies, emotional, clean, and mature without any explicit or suggestive content. Morning came slowly after the long, stormy night. The sound of dripping water echoed softly from the porch roof. The sky outside was still gray, but the worst of the storm had passed. Clara woke up to the faint light of dawn slipping through the curtains. She blinked, disoriented for a moment, till she realized where she was. Lethan's room. The blanket was still wrapped around her shoulders. The candle had melted down to a small puddle of wax on the table. She sat up quickly, embarrassed that she had fallen asleep there. Ethan was still in the room, sitting by the window, staring outside. He turned when he heard her move. "Good morning," he said with a small smile. "You slept through the rest of the storm." Clara brushed her hair back, her cheeks warm. "I didn't mean to. I must have been more tired than I thought." "It's okay," he said. "You looked peaceful. I didn't want to wake you." Something in the way he said that made her heart stir. There was no awkwardness in his voice, only quiet care. She nodded and looked toward the rain-washed world outside. The trees glittered with droplets, and the air felt clean, new. She stood up, smoothing her sweater. "I'll make breakfast," she said. Downstairs, the house smelled of damp air and coffee. Ethan joined her, helping without being asked. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them wasn't heavy like before. It felt gentle, like they were both learning to breathe again. After breakfast, Ethan washed the dishes while Clara wiped the counters. He asked about her work, her garden, and the neighbors she used to chat with. His voice was calm and thoughtful, so much like his father's that it almost hurt. When she turned to put the dishes away, her eyes met the framed photo on the kitchen, while Michael smiling with his arm around Ethan at a lake years ago. Her heart clenched. He loved that day, she said softly. Ethan looked up. Yeah, he caught a fish half the size of that boat, he said, laughing quietly. Then his smile faded. I still can't believe he's gone. Clara rested her hand on the table. I know, she whispered. Some days I still reach out to tell him things. Then I remember. They both went quiet. The sound of rain outside filled the silence again. That evening, the storm clouds returned, but this time the thunder was far away. The lights flickered back to life, filling the house with a warm glow. Clara felt grateful for the light, but she also missed the quiet comfort of that candlelit night. That night they sat together on the porch again, the sky clear and full of stars. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of pine and earth. You know, Ethan said quietly, I used to be angry at the world, at Dad for leaving, at myself for not saying more to him. Clara looked at him gently. I was angry too, but the truth is, love always leaves something behind. And I think that's what we're holding on to now. He nodded slowly. Maybe that's what he meant, changing form. They sat in silence after that, both lost in thought. The world around them felt calm, almost sacred. Inside, the house glowed softly from the lights they had left on. It no longer felt haunted by the past. Instead, it felt filled with memory, with care, with quiet healing before heading to bed. Ethan turned to her and said, Thanks for everything. Clara, for staying strong when I couldn't. She smiled faintly. You've been strong too, Ethan, more than you think. He looked at her for a moment, his expression sincere. I think we helped each other. And she knew he was right. That night, Clara couldn't sleep right away. She lay in bed, listening to the faint creak of the house and the gentle wind outside. She thought of how far they had come since that first stormy night, the fear, the loneliness, the silence, and how now. All of it felt softer. The ache of loss was still there, but it had turned into something else. Something gentler. It was no longer a wound. It was a reminder that love, in all its forms, endures. Before she drifted to sleep, she whispered to herself, Thank you, Michael. We're okay now. And for the first time in a long time, she meant it. Autumn had arrived quietly. The air in the small Oregon town grew crisp, and golden leaves danced across the streets. The Benson house, once filled with silence and sorrow, now carried a gentler energy. The pain of loss had softened into memory. And laughter sometimes found its way back into the rooms. Clara stood by the window one morning, watching the leaves fall from the maple tree Michael had planted years ago. The sunlight poured through the branches, painting the room in shades of gold. It reminded her of hope, fragile, but real. Ethan was packing upstairs. His short break from college had come to an end. And though he didn't say much about it, Clara could sense he didn't want to leave. The house had become more than just a place to visit. It had become a part of his healing. Clara made breakfast coffee, eggs and toast, just like she used to make for Michael before work. When Ethan came down carrying his duffel bag, she smiled warmly. You ready? He nodded, sitting at the table. Almost. I just keep feeling like I'm forgetting something. She poured him coffee. That's how it always feels before you leave home. He smiled faintly. Home? He repeated, as if testing the word. Yeah, it actually feels like that again. They ate quietly for a while, both trying to pretend it was a normal morning. But the unspoken truth sat between them. His absence would be felt. The house would grow quiet again, and the rooms would echo with memory. Still, this time, Clara knew it wouldn't be the same kind of emptiness. It would be peaceful, not painful. After breakfast, Ethan helped her wash the dishes. "You shouldn't do all this alone," he said. "I'll manage," she replied with a gentle smile. "I always do." He dried a plate, then looked at her. "You're different now," he said suddenly. "Happier." She paused. "I guess I am. You helped with that." He looked away, a little shy. "You helped me too." When they finished cleaning, Ethan went upstairs to grab the last of his things. Clara followed him, leaning against the doorframe as he zipped his bag. His room looked tidier than before, but it carried signs of life: a book on the desk, a sweater folded neatly, a mug by the window. "You kept this room nice, Kay," she said. He grinned. "Had to. It's the only room with a decent view." She walked over to the window. Outside, the hills stretched under a soft golden light. "Your father used to sit here," she said. "He said the view reminded him that life keeps moving, no matter what happens." Ethan nodded. "I think he'd be glad we're still here, still moving." They stood together for a moment, both lost in thought. Finally, Ethan slung his bag over his shoulder. "I should go. The bus leaves in 20 minutes. Clara walked him to the door. The wind was cool and carried the scent of pine. She wanted to say so many things: how proud she was of him, how grateful she felt for the quiet comfort he had given her, but words felt too small. Instead, she hugged him. "Take care of yourself," she said softly. "Call me when you get there." "I will," he promised, hugging her back. "And thank you, Clara, for everything. For not giving up on me." She pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. "You're family, Ethan. I never could." He smiled, the same warm, steady smile his father once had. Then he turned toward the gate and started down the path. Clara stood in the doorway, Key watching until he disappeared at the end of the road. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel lonely this time. It felt peaceful, filled with memories that no longer hurt. She took a deep breath and went back inside as she walked through the hallway. Something caught her eye: a small folded note on Ethan's desk. She picked it up and opened it carefully. His handwriting was neat but slightly rushed. "Clara, thank you for staying when everything felt broken. You reminded me that love doesn't die. It just changes shape. I'll see you soon. Ethan." Clara held the note to her chest, her eyes filling with tears. She sat down on his bed, reading the words again and again. For a long time, she didn't move. It felt like a message not just from Ethan, but from Michael too, as if through their son, he had spoken one last time. She smiled softly through her tears. "You both saved me," she whispered. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. She stood, folded the note neatly, and placed it beside the framed photo of Michael and Ethan that still sat on the nightstand. In the following weeks, Clara kept herself busy. She went back to her part-time job at the local library, started baking again, and even joined a small gardening club in town. People noticed the change in her: how she smiled more, how her voice carried warmth again. Every Sunday, she would sit on the porch with her tea and think about Ethan. Sometimes he called. Sometimes he sent photos from college: smiling faces, city lights, sketches of buildings. Each time she saw them, her heart filled with pride. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from Ethan. Inside was a small photo of a building he was designing for a college project: a community library surrounded by gardens. On the back, he had written, "Inspired by Dad's favorite place and your garden. I wanted to build something that feels like home." Clara felt her throat tighten as she read it. She placed the photo on her desk beside Michael's old pen. And for the first time, she realized how full her life had become again. The grief hadn't vanished. It had transformed. It had turned into purpose, into love that reached beyond loss. That evening, Stray made a cup of cinnamon tea and sat by the window. The sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, and for a moment, she could almost feel Michael's presence beside her. "You'd be proud of him," she whispered softly. "He's everything you hoped he'd be." The wind seemed to sigh gently, like a quiet reply. She smiled. As night settled in, she turned off the lights and let the moonlight fill the room. She thought of the journey they had all taken together, the storm, the pain, the small steps toward healing. It had taken time, but she finally understood what Michael's letter had meant. Love doesn't end when someone dies. It changes shape. It becomes the laughter in another room, the warmth of a shared meal, the courage to face another day. Clara looked around the room at the photos, the memories, the life still unfolding, and felt peace. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was living in the past. She was part of the present again. The Benson house stood quietly under the stars. No longer a place of grief, but a home reborn through love. And though Michael was gone, a part of him lived in every flower in the garden, every smile on Ethan's face, and every heartbeat that still dared to love after loss, as the wind whispered through the open window. Clara closed her eyes and said softly to the night, "Thank you for everything." And somewhere deep in the quiet, it felt like the universe answered back with warmth, with light, and with peace.